Now we will talk about function in JavaScript. Function is used to group code together so you can call them whenever you like. A function should perform a particular task. You write a function to avoid writing the same block of code many times when needed. So you see here the first example of a function in JavaScript. And we start with a function keyword and then follow with the name of the function. And in the bracket, you see in this parenthesis is the list of parameters, input parameters you will convey to the function. Function names can contain letters, digit, underscore, and dollar sign, and it applies the same rules with the variables in JavaScript. And inside the parentheses, you can include more than one parameters and separated by commas. Technically, the variables listed in the function declaration are parameters, and the values passed to the function whenever it calls are arguments. A function can have many parameters or take many arguments as the input as you want. And the code to be executed by the functions is placed in the curly brackets. For example, this is a very simple functions that return the products of two parameters. The code inside the function will be executed when something invokes the functions. So the function can be called or can be triggered in one of these three cases. First, when an event occurs, so then the function will be called from the event. When it is called from the other JavaScript code, and when it can be self-invoked or is run automatically. So it depends on your configuration. And so you will learn a lot about function invocation later when we go deeper with using it inside HTML page. So another things to notice is that the value passed to functions as arguments are the copies of those values, unless the arguments are objects. So which means when we use a my function and we put it inside two variables, actual argument like p1 can be any other variables, then the values of this variable will not be changed, even that if we modify it somehow inside the curly bracket, and it remains the same. But if we pass down the object, then the object will be changed after we call the function. And here you see the formal syntax of the functions. So start with the function keyword, function name, list of parameters, and the curly brackets showing the code to be executed inside the function. I open again the example function we have made in the previous example. And here's a tiny function reserve a number. It takes the paragraph n, it's like a parameter n, so it's only one parameters, and it return another values. So here we passing a number as an argument to the functions. So in case this is not a number, but it's we use input equal to, for example, and then we pass it down in inputs, and then have the same, it will have the same effect, but the value of input after this will be the same, 32243, but not the reverse number. So when JavaScript reaches the return statements that we see that happen in the end of the functions, the function will stop executing and jump out of the curly bracket. So if the function were invoked from the statement, JavaScript return to the execute code after invoking statement. And the function often compute a return value as we see in the previous example, and that value is returned to the caller. And now we talk a bit about the data types. Data types is a very important concept for programming language. For example, if you learn about Java, you see there are many different data types. Even for the number, it can appear as an integer, as a real, as a float numbers, and etc. And a data type actually is a classification of data which tells the compilers or interpreter how the programmer intends to use the data. The type defines the operations that can be done on the data. For example, you can multiply, you can have the product of the two integer number, but you cannot multiply two strings. Right. For example, so what happens if we add the word Volvo to the number 16? We need produce an error or we need produce a result. So when adding a number and a string, for example, JavaScript will automatically treat the number as a string, and this become a combination of two strings. So this very depends on the language, but it might not be the same in, for example, C or C++. I think in Java it's also happening the same way. That is autocast value. Also back to the data types in JavaScript. The language supports several data types. The number type use 64 bits to represent a number, and so it means the range of the value is pretty large. The number can be both an integer and a decimal. Boolean type, you see in the third example here. It means only two values is use 1 bit, 0 or 1. So it means the value can take true or false. String type is used to represent the textual data, and you see the text like the second line here, and we need to put it in. You have to put it in a quote, a single quote. And null is a special type of data type, represents for unknown or missing value. And another type is undefined, mean the value associated with the variables who are declared but have not yet had a value assigned to them. So they're showing the examples, what happened if we plus the 16 with Volvo. So this actually become string 16 plus the string Volvo. And again, in the end of the statement, we need to have a semicolon. All of these four data types called primitive types. So it means that one variable of this type take directly is a direct plot in the memory cache. Java is easy typing language. Means that they attempt to convert the data to whatever type it needs in a given context. So in another way, you can understand that JavaScript try to keep everything as correct as possible, to try to interpret your code in a way that it can run regardless it is your intention or not. And also JavaScript types are dynamic. That means that the same variables like foo, as you see in this example, can hold many different data types. So first we declare the foo and assign it to the number, so it becomes a number. But then we can right away using it to store a string, or to store a boolean, and later to change it to store the null data. Now we talk about more complex type of data, which is array. JavaScript arrays are used to store multiple values in a single variable. So this is actually not anything strange to you if you learn any programming language before. You can think about arrays as a list of things. So this list can be a list of values, list of objects, of events, or it can be a list of a list. You can use array object to create an array in JavaScript, as you see in these two examples. So this actually is very likely the way we do in object-oriented programming language, where we create things by assigning the new object. So in the first line we declare an array with 10 slots. We haven't assign or initiate any variables in that slot, but we only reserve memory for these 10 slots. Arrays are indexed starting from 0, and so in this case the nums can index from 0 to number 9. So in the second line we declare the array but also assign the values, initial items. So this is an array of 3 elements, and each of them contain the name of the car, car brand name. And so as I mentioned, array is a special object. They're also old-fashioned to create an array using variables. For example, when we have the square bracket and with the index here, we already initiate and also we assigned a value for the arrays. But this is the way that we access to the variables of an arrays. So we assign the value by using the equal operator here, and we also creating accessing to the value of the arrays by using the array names and the indexing number. And this is always when we initiate the arrays. So we are using the curly bracket. Here I would like to show you another example. So we now running small problems. It's a sorting. Given a list of numbers, we need to sort it from the smallest to largest. Let's see the result of this one first. So giving the number listed in the array R1, you see it appears very randomly, and we print out the number sorted out from small to large. And now we investigate how we can do that. So if you know about the algorithm, then we are doing the for most simple ways. So we need to have a temporary array to contain the output. So we call this array 2, and we initiate it as an empty array without anything. Then we started. We also need immediate variable to contain the intermediate result. We call it the mean, and we start assign it with the first variable, with the first value, the first elements in the array. So here's the element at the index 0, and have another one is positions. We also use another variables called max. So here we can use the var to initiate, but also we can do it without the vars, and we point it to the first element in the array. So what we are doing now is to start a loop running from the beginning and going to the end of the array 1, and we start finding what is the max values. So after running this code, the max will contain the number 8, which is the largest number in the array 1. And then we do the comparing by running a double loop with two counter I and j. So we running and compare. We do the pairwise comparisons. So every single element inside the array 1 will be compared to the others, and we switch the value. So which one is larger, we put it in the larger in the like later space, and then we do and put the results in the array too. And after the loops running, we get the array sorted, and we write it down by using the method document.write. Now, as we see previously, we initiate an array as an array object, which is a special object. So now we need to talk about object type in JavaScript. So even JavaScript, the event-driven programming is become closer to and closer to object-oriented developments, which have been very popular, almost as a standard in the industry. The concept of object is to develop a better link to real life. For example, in real life, a car is an object. A car, as you see in the pictures, has properties like a weight, color, methods like start and stop. So all cars have the same properties, but the property values can differ from car to car. All cars will have the same methods, but the methods are performed at a different time. Objective properties accessed through the dot notations. So first you see is the way we declare about object. So we put it in a curly bracket, and we started with so in the first we tell about the characteristics or about the features of the object, and then after the columns we tell about the value of that feature. And to access to features or to properties, we use a dot, as you see here. So we can say car dot descriptions to assign a value, or to either access the values or to assign the values of the feature. So for example, here we define the car description, define these features by giving it as the output of the functions. So when we write a function in this way, it's a shortcut. We don't need to give it a name for the function because we will not use it anywhere else. We don't need a name, and the function is associated directly with the car description. So here we return the type, which is the car type. So here is automatically recognized it belongs to the car context, and then with the word model, and then the model of the car, and then the color. So as mentioned before, HTML events are the things that happen to HTML elements, and this is one of the triggers to call the JavaScript functions. When JavaScript is used in HTML pages, JavaScript can react on these events. What we need to do is to bind the JavaScript code to the events, and there are three ways to do that. So the first is to use an HTML attribute. So in the following example, the on-click attributes of the buttons will activate the blue line, which is JavaScript code. We can also not using or not writing JavaScript directly here, but putting it in a function and put the function name here instead, and of course putting the argument for it if we have. So in this example, the JavaScript code changed the content of the element with the ID demo, and it will appear the date, the current date. The disadvantage of this approach is that you make your JavaScript code hard to maintain. So the second way to do is to bind an event to an appropriate property of the element. If you have a reference to a link called myLink in JavaScript, you can add a click event like in this code. So instead of using on-click property of the buttons, we add the listeners to the click, and we will trigger the functions which show the alert box. So the add event listeners is active. So in this case, my button is called the event hand. So here you see there's a different events, even HTML properties that it can trigger the JavaScript functions. We mentioned about on click, there can have on change, on mouse over, on mouse key down, on load, for example. So there can be other attributes as well. Even though the problem is hard to maintain, but when we just write simple and with a small amount of JavaScript code, it is sufficient to add directly the code, JavaScript code inside the page using these events. I'll show you another example of using HTML JavaScript functions. So you see a simple function called show high. I start with declare by the keyword function, then follow with the name, function name. And inside the functions, I firstly declare a variable called deep. So this is actually not the deep that we see here. I can of course using another name, but it's already here. So the deep wouldn't be, so firstly we will take the value of the elements with the ID new post. So the deep now replace all the deep new post. So if the deep style.display is none, it's different with none, so we restyle the deep here and make the display as none. So you need to notice that here I have the access to the div as an object, so it have the style as a property of the object, and the display is a property that we can change in the style. And here we use the else, so remember about the else block. So if the expression here is not true, if it's false, then we operate the code, execute the code inside the else block. So it means that in the other ways we show the deep top, so we can see how it look like. And not mention that here we have a buttons, and as you see we use the on click property of the buttons, and we trigger the show high function in this way. So when we click the show high, we will check if the div here is appear or not. If this is visible, then we make it invisible, and the other way around. Click here, so it display, it is hiding, and then now it's displaying.